discussion about.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Back to work
I forgot.
we go. Ladies and gentlemen,
Barely.
welcome to Tuesday, October 19th, year of our Lord 2021. Where we try to survive this kakistocracy. The word of the day is kakistocracy. Kakistocracy. You know, like, have you heard of the aristocracy? Anybody ever heard of the aristocracy? Raise your hand. What's the aristocracy? Yeah? You heard of the aristocrats or the aristocats? Did Disney make a movie? Okay. Aristocracy or aristocrats are the rich people, the high class people in any society, right? And the idea is that they kind of control the culture, right? Well, then you got words like democracy, people rule, monarchy, one ruler, right? What is kakistocracy? The word of the day. Kakistocracy, the meaning of that word is a country not ruled by the rich necessarily or ruled we the people, democracy. It's a organization or country that are led by the least qualified among the population, or the most inept among the population. So I don't know why that's the word of the day, but I think of that word often when I think of the world I'm living in, and the country I'm living in today. Kakistocracy. Anyway, that's our intro to U.S. history today. Innovations. Wasn't necessarily a kakistocracy back then, right? I think we got to Edison, right? Did we get to Edison yesterday? Yeah, past Edison. You've known about Edison since first grade. Mrs. Henry, I'm sure, told you about Thomas Edison. So we don't have to spend too much time on the prolific life of Thomas Edison. And you all remember the one lesson that every kid learns from Edison, which is, what's the biggest lesson? I mean, you're not going to be an inventor. Well, I shouldn't say that. You might not be an inventor like Edison. Chances of someone ever being that prolific again, because so many advancements in so many areas have already been made. But what's the big lesson, the overall lesson that you should have learned from Thomas Edison? Yeah.
If you buy out someone's business, you can take their name off of all the stuff and they don't get credit and nobody knows who they are.
So now he's a robber baron. Go ahead.
Don't give up.
Okay, don't give up, right? It was 1% inspiration, 99% perspiration. You never heard that one? Thomas Edison's efforts, how many times did he try to make this incandescent bulb work? Hundreds, if not thousands, right? Thousands of times before he finally got to work. It was not so much that he was so much smarter than everyone else. It was his dedication, his perseverance, his not giving up. He continued to plow, and then he finally came up with it. And then, according to Noel, he also just, when he came up with it, he made sure no one else got the credit because other people were trying to do it at that time too. So he goes down in history as inventor.
Yeah, I just recently watched a documentary and he ended up taking the Duke's name off. It wasn't about him, but in the end, he ended up taking the Duke's name off.
Was it a guy from France or America? I mean, it could probably America, but.
I didn't see the beginning of the documentary because Mom and Jonah started it without me.
You heard of Tesla and Westinghouse. All right, we start politics yet?
Oh, yeah.
So we did talk. See, your guys are ahead of our secretary. Who? Garfield?
No, Arthur.
Arthur becomes president. We told you about the zero factor. We did? What's the zero factor? Every president. 1880, then it's a trend. If it happens once, not even a streak, right? Happens twice, hey, what's going on here? Happens 3 times, now we got a streak and maybe a trend. 1840, who was elected president? William Henry Harrison. How long was he president?
3 months.
No, 1 month, 30 days. Like, got pneumonia and died shortly after being inaugurated. So 1840, he's elected, he dies in office. 1860, who was elected president?
Abraham Lincoln.
Abraham. Oh, I guess I shouldn't have put the laser on his head.
Oh my gosh.
That is such bad humor.
It is.
That is. McKenna, I'm sorry. I thought maybe 160 years later, it would be acceptable, but I guess it's still not. Bella's trying to figure out why I think that's funny, or why that was a bad attempt. Abraham Lincoln was elected. That's not funny, man. I really love Abraham Lincoln. I didn't know him, but, I shouldn't have put the laser on his head. I'm sorry.
It's just funny how.
You
not-
said it.
I know. So, who was elected in 1880? Garfield. What happens? He is shot at the DC Railway. Who was elected in 1900? By the way, Garfield's from Ohio. Who was elected in 1900? Another Ohioan. You may have been to his monument. Who? McKinley. Guess what happens? Assassinated. Who was elected in 1920? Another Ohioan. He was the first man elected when women finally got suffrage, the right to vote. His name was? Elected in 1920. His name was Warren G. Harding. Remember that handsome dude? That's another bad joke. Because women finally got the right to vote, so of course, they're just gonna vote for the better looking guy. So insulting.
I think it's funny.
Who got elected in 1940? By the way, Harding didn't get assassinated. Harding died in office. I think he had a heart attack. He's a big drinker, I think. But he dies in office. Who was elected in 1940? The person that was elected the most
JFK.
times. No.
Oh, Rosie.
Roosevelt, FDR. He was actually elected 4 times. He didn't die in office after the election of 1940. He died after 1944, but he was still elected in 1940, right? So he dies shortly after his election in 1944. Of course, you know, because he didn't finish his term for World War II. Who was elected in 1960? JFK. You know that story. He was assassinated. Now the trend ends, the zero factor curse ends in 1980, kind of. Because if not for modern medicine, Ronald Wilson Reagan wouldn't have made it past 2 months of his presidency. On March 30th, 1981, Ronald Reagan was shot and emergency surgery, and the bullet just missed his heart, saved his life, and so he averted the zero factor curse, but he was still shot. If it wasn't for modern medicine, he would have continued it. So the quote unquote curse ends in 2000 because George W. Bush was elected and he's still living. So the curse is over, so Joe Biden can rest easy. I am so bad at humor today.
I'm gonna look for you.
He is the oldest president. And we don't wish ill on anyone. And by the way, concerning that, even if you were of that mind, be careful what you wish for. Someone's waiting in the wings. Wait, how far we get?
That's fresh.
This right here? Arthur becomes president. What happens? Remember, this is an era of, what's the R word? Reform. Yeah, it is the Gilded Age, but because of all the corruption, if you were a politician that stood up to Boss Tweed, if you were a politician that stood up loudly and said, I am against all this corruption, I'm against, part of the reason you might not do that, you might not have courage to stand up against what's happening in government because you got to follow the dollars, right? If you stand up against corruption, and corruption is usually led by money, then the people that are being corrupt, who are in control, they're not going to fund your campaign. You see what happens? So it's very difficult for politicians to stand up against corruption because then they might not get elected because they're not part of the gang. See what I'm saying, CP? So it might seem like, well, who wouldn't stand up against corruption? Huh. Who's standing up today? Think about it. Who's really standing up and putting themselves out there with all the stuff that's going on and the overreach of the national government? Who's really standing up to it? Is it because they really do want to go along with it, or is it because if they do, then they won't get elected? Because corruption is very powerful. It's led by money. So Arthur was elected because he said he's going to stand up to these people. So he creates the Civil Service Commission. What is the civil service? We talked about it yesterday. It's not military service, it's civilian service. You are serving the public. You are a government employee serving the public, but not militarily. You are a policeman, a fireman, a postal worker, an FBI agent, someone that works in the Senate office, civil service, staff at the White House, civil service, Secret Service, civil service. All of those jobs. This was created so that whoever the leader was couldn't just handpick who he wanted. Remember what happened with Grant? Grant was a great military leader, not so much a great political leader, because the people he chose around him weren't, he was a good man, but the people he chose around him weren't so good. The integrity wasn't there. Corruption crept in because maybe they weren't qualified. So this was created to stop that spoil system where presidents would just appoint people when they really weren't qualified. So today, if you want one of those jobs, if you wanted to go into the FBI or I don't know, you can work in the science field for the government, you have to pass what's called a civil service test. Post office, policeman, fireman, you got to pass the civil service test. The mongrel tariff. What's a mongrel? It's kind of the same as a mutt. What's a mutt? What's a mutt? There's no dog people out there. What's a mutt?
A dog.
What kind of dog?
Is it fatherless or?
What's that?
Is it like motherless or something? Or fatherless? Something. What? Oh, that's something else.
That's the B word?
Yeah.
What were you gonna say?
James Brown.
A mix, right? A mutt is not a purebred. A mutt is a dog that's like got all kinds of background, right? That's a mutt or a mongrel. It's not a purebred. So we were talking about tariffs. One of the things that has to be reformed is the tariffs. Tariffs are set really high, Elise, because northern businesses, where most of the flow of money is happening, if you notice New York, Ohio even becomes very prominent in politics, most of the money flows in the north. The northern businesses like high tariffs. Why? Because if it costs more to buy goods from other countries, that's going to benefit them selling to the American people, right? But what happens over time if the tariffs are too high? Other countries catch on and they go, oh, well then we're just not going to ship our stuff to you. We're not selling the goods, so now what? That affects international trade. They also raise their tariffs. Now how are our companies who want to continue to build their wealth, how are they going to sell to all those people in Europe? Make sense? So there needs to be reform. The South wants lower tariffs, trying to find balance. And the mongrel tariff was passed. And the point of it was very confusing. There were a lot of, this happens today. It's always happened in politics. You want to pass a bill. A bill is going to become a law, right? We would like to think that if we wanted to pass a law that said the speed limit has to be 75 miles per hour, you would like to think that in Congress, this is the way it works. I propose a bill, the speed limit to be 75 miles per hour, and they vote on it, and that's it, right? Unfortunately, that's not the way it works. Somebody will come along and they'll attach something else to that main bill, and that causes all kinds of confusion because, like, wait, I thought I was voting for the speed limit law, and they attach something there about, I don't know, the age that you can smoke cigarettes. I don't know, just thought of something. So I think we talked about tobacco yesterday. So they attached that to the bill. Wait, I thought this was about the speed limit law. Like today, if you're following any of the news, the big thing is they want to spend $3.5 trillion on what they're calling an infrastructure spending thing by the government, right? Well, how many things are attached to that? You know how many pages that is? Wouldn't it be nice if when we're going to pass a law, it would just be, here's the law, short and simple, pass it or not. Unfortunately, that's not the way it works. That became the mongrel tariff because the idea was we got to find balance with the tariff. So here's the tariff rate. Oh, but for this product, it's down here. And for that product, it's a little higher. And for that product, it's a little lower. So it becomes known as the mongrel or mutt tariff. All right, more politics. Let's talk about some elections. 1884, Garfield was president. He was killed. Arthur becomes president. The Republicans, after one term of Arthur, they've had enough of him. They set up a man named James G. Blaine from the state of Maine. Imagine how much fun they could have with the campaign slogan, Blaine from Maine. He's against a Democrat, Grover Cleveland. He's from New York. By the way, I have Grover Cleveland in bold print because some of you know he did become president, because you know your presidents, right? President number 22 is Grover Cleveland. He is going to be, I don't think I have it on here, he's actually going to be the first Democrat president since 1856. With the beginning of Lincoln's presidency, the first Republican president, 1860, they've all been Republicans. Grover Cleveland's going to break that streak. Why? Because he's what's the R word? Reformer. He stands up against you know who. Who's the boss? Boss Tweed, Tammany Hall. Listen, it's an era in politics where if you have the courage to stand up against these people, the general population is going to like you. Because they have figured out who's really controlling their cities. And it's not the people they elect. It's these other entities like Tammany Hall. Cleveland's going to win because of his reform, but he's also going to win because of the mugwumps. Now, if you weren't in class today, if you're not paying attention on the video, and all you're doing is taking notes, then you wouldn't understand this for the test. Because I don't explain up there what a mugwump is. You got to be here. And I don't explain what it means. Ma, where's my pa? What? Okay, here it is. Ready? This is the election of 1884. Mugwumps, this is why this word's up here. Does anybody know what a rhino is in today's vernacular? What is a rhino if we're talking about today's political vernacular? What's a rhino? Yeah. Republican in name only. What does that mean? What is someone trying to say when they call them a rhino? Is that supposed to be a compliment or an insult? An insult coming from another Republican, right? So what does it mean if someone calls them a Republican in name only? What are they saying about that person? Yeah.
Not really, I don't think that they're just doing it for a face, not really trying to make decisions like that.
Yes. And Republicans are associated with what word? Conservative. And Democrats are associated with what word? Starts with an L? Liberal. So if someone is more, and what's the word in the middle? Starts with an M? Moderate. So if someone is tending to be more moderate, which a conservative would say, why would you agree with liberals on anything? Then they get labeled a rhino. Well, in this era, they got labeled a mugwump. You want to know why? It's a humorous thing. I'm going to make another attempt at humor. They were called mugwumps because if you combine the two words together, bug, what's your mug? What part of your body is your mug? You know, what's a mug shot? When Elise got arrested, oh. I didn't mean to let that out. That wasn't part of the humor. What's a mugwump? Here's your mug, right? What part of your body do you think your wump is? took us? Okay, so what's a mugwump? In 1884, a mugwump was like a rhino. Here's this part of your body. You're on this side of the fence. Here's the fence. Here's Republicans. Here's Democrats. Here's the line. I'm a mugwump if I'm like, are you Republican? Are you with us? Or are you with the Democrats? Or actually, are you with us or are you with the Democrats? And I was just thinking maybe that's how they got their symbol. Okay. I was trying to get that one. Do you know the symbol of the Democrat Party, Bella? Do you know the symbol of the Republican Party?
No.
They're both animals. Does anybody know the symbols of the parties?
Oh.
Okay. So mugwump,
I get it now.
are you with us or against us? On this side of the fence is your face, and on that side of the fence is your yeah.
There's a general
What's
statute.
What's the biblical word for a donkey?
Okay, no need to get
This
political.
is Heartland.
Out of pocket.
She got it.
That one was
She
funny.
got it. When I said the biblical word, the King James word for a donkey, she finally got it. Jade's still trying to figure it out.
Jake doesn't know what the word donkey is.
Think of your Christmas gift.
Anyway, that's what a mugwump was. But what about this, Sid? Grover Cleveland gets elected, even though the Republicans were publishing stories about him. Now think, this is 1884. This isn't 2020, where this type of behavior is much more accepted in our society. It's 1884, and there's a rumor that Grover Cleveland has had a child out of wedlock. And that's a big scandal in 1884. So Republicans were taunting by saying, Mom, where's my paw? And making that a big campaign issue and making fun of him because they're saying that he had a child to a woman that he wasn't married to. I think the end of it goes, Mama, where's my paw? He's off to the White House, ha ha ha. Something like that, yeah. See, you thought politics were bad now. This is always how it's been. What did Solomon say in Ecclesiastes? There's nothing new under the sun. All right, what happens with Cleveland's presidency? Remember, this is a time of, what's the R word? Reform. The Gilded Age, with all of the corruption, reformers are starting to take the lead and become very popular. If you're willing and courageous enough to stand up against the established corrupt system, the people in general are going to like you. Why did this person that speaks so crassly and has all those mean tweets, why did he get elected in 2016? And some claim he got elected again in 2020 with all of that because his message was what? Standing up against what a lot of people see as a corrupt government. And no matter what he said, how mean it seemed he was being to people, he was standing up to them. It's called populism. Anyway, under Cleveland, the Interstate Commerce Act gets passed because the railroad companies were fixing their rates or having discriminatory rates. What's that word mean, discriminating? Like, we'll charge this group of people one rate and that group of people another rate. Was that right? Is that right? Should we allow that in our society? But they're a free country. It's a free country and they're a company. They can do what they want, can't they? See how nothing's black and white? You got to figure out balance. How do we balance out the idea that the railroad company is a free enterprise? They can operate like they want. Oh, but wait, we can't just let companies take advantage of people, like with the trust with Rockefeller. Doesn't something have to be done about it? Isn't there some role of government to make sure that kind of like people are treated fairly to protect people. Is that true? Doesn't everybody agree that's true? That there should be some protection for people against maybe rich people just taking over the country, right? So it was time in this era of reform that the Interstate Commerce Act was passed. Government said, you know what, we gotta stop this. We've got to, what's called, when the government passes laws to try to control companies, it's called, starts with R, regulation. We're gonna regulate your company. What? This is America. You can't tell me how to run my. Yeah, in certain cases we can, if it's obvious to most people that the way you're running your company is hurting most people. And that was the case with the railroads. So the Interstate Commerce Act was passed. Now, here's the thing. Once you start doing that, how far does it go? These are constant debates. Something for you future leaders to think about. How far does it go? Because once you start allowing the government to regulate, how many regulations are we supposed to, how many regulations is a company supposed to put up with before they're not really free to, not free enterprise anymore? The government's controlling them. Things to think about. There isn't really a right answer. Like, how much? Why did Trump get elected? People today see the national government as overreaching. Too many regulations. Businesses being constricted because there's too many taxes and regulations. We've got to free up businesses. So he comes into office, boom, the economy explodes. Because all of the investors in the companies are like, yeah, businesses are going to be freed up. Now what's going to happen? If they become too free, the other side's going to come along and say, hey, we got to start regulating these companies. They're taking advantage of people. See? This is nothing new under the sun. This is always going to happen. Because people are fallen creatures. So people are going to take advantage where they can. So debate is always, is government necessary? Some would say a necessary evil. But how much government? Election of so going back, 1880, what was Garfield's administration? What was the thing that was put in place? I'm sorry, Arthur's administration? Civil Service Commission. What was 1884? Interstate Commerce Act. Here comes 1888. Cleveland's the president. He's pretty popular. He doesn't win. By the way, who's W.H. Harrison? I wrote shorthand there, fit it on there. What was it? William Henry. If you're wondering, like, hey, was John Quincy Adams John Adams' son? Yes. Was William Henry Harrison, was Benjamin Harrison William Henry Harrison's grandson? Yes. Benjamin Harrison runs against Cleveland. Cleveland's actually kind of popular, but he's going to lose. Harrison, oh, by the way, he's going to lose because the way things were maneuvered, it's all about the electoral votes, right? Harrison got enough support in New York and Ohio. If you haven't noticed yet, you will notice on the coming election because you'll be able to vote. Mm-hmm. Yeah, if you're at least 15, you'll be able to vote in 2024, right?
Yeah.
Tina, when's your birthday?
Okay, never mind.
When's your birthday? When is it? November 28th?
Yes.
Oh no, what year?
2006.
Oh, that's right.
I'm just missed.
I know,
I'm so sad.
I know.
If you're born before November of 2006, you'll be able to vote.
I'm boycotting them.
All right.
I'm rigging the vote system.
What happens during Harrison's administration? Listen, Harrison, we're in this era of reform. We're in this era of the national government taking more power. centralizing power. So Harrison thinks, you know how I can please the people? Spend more money. I'll increase. Hey, this will be very popular. Isn't this always popular? If you ever hear a politician, he thinks he needs to be more popular, he'll start to show that he really supports the military. Do you ever notice that? All right. So Harrison says, I'm going to increase the funding for the military and I'm going to increase their pensions. So when they retire, we can take care of our retired military people. Yeah. But it leads to not only that spending, but he's spending money beyond that because he wants to please this group and that group. And it becomes the first, what's the nickname? This is the 51st Congress, by the way. So remember, the House of Representatives is elected every 2 years. So we're now over 100 years old. So this is the 51st Congress, and they're known as the $1 billion Congress. We throw the words around like they're nothing. They were the first Congress to ever spend $1 billion. Wow. And now we're talking about 30 trillion. Anyway, that was part of Harrison's legacy. Also, we talked about this before, I think, the Sherman Antitrust Act as a result of Rockefeller's huge trust that he developed. The problem with the Sherman Antitrust Act, it was meant to bust up those trusts. The language in it was too vague. By the way, you know why we have so many lawyers? The more laws you have, the more lawyers you need, right? And every time you pass a law, someone's going to take the language of the law and try to manipulate it, right? Well, the way the Sherman Antitrust Law was written, the language was very vague. Like, what do you mean by competition? What do you mean by control? What do you mean by? So lawyers would just pick that apart, and they would go to court in favor of their company or their trust, and they would prove to a court that we're not wrong. No, we're not doing that. Because the law wasn't strong enough. Then you got the McKinley tariff. Yes, William McKinley of Ohio. By the way, why are these called the Sherman Antitrust Act or the McKinley tariff? Well, they're named after the person in Congress that introduces the bill. Here's the way it works. Annie has an idea. She says this should be a law. So she gets Riley and Drew and Trey to agree with her. So they co-sponsor her law. And then it goes to Congress. What's it get labeled? Annie's law. Because she's the one that first came up with it. So McKinley came up with this tariff and he got enough support. It's the highest tariff in history. This is after 1888. Guess what it leads to? What's a tariff supposed to do? It's supposed to make it easier for you to sell your product in your own country because other products are going to cost too much, right? But it also puts money into the treasury. When the government puts a tariff on a product, when that product comes ashore, they pay that tax and it goes to the government. That was the problem with the corruption with that Roscoe Conkling, right? What happens if the tariff gets too high? The government makes less money. And I put on there to remind myself and you, what's the tax lesson there? Unfortunately, America has to learn this way too often. And I can show you stats if you need proof. The higher the taxes, you would think, oh, more money for the government. Guess what? It rarely works that way. The higher the tax rate, most often, less money comes into the government. Doesn't that sound oxymoronic? Doesn't that sound like it's contradictory? You pay, if the tax rate's higher, that means you're going to get more money to the government. Guess what? You don't. When Ronald Reagan came into office in the 1980s and the economy was bad, he said, first thing we're going to do is lower taxes. What? You can't lower taxes. People out there are hurting. The government has to help them. The government needs more money. Guess what? He lowered taxes, and guess what the government got? More money. Anybody explain how that works? Related to the tariff. What happens when the tariff was too high? What did the other countries do? Well, they raised theirs, but what about our revenue? What's a tariff do? You come, you want to sell your product in our country, boom, as soon as you take it off the ship, we're taxing it, and that money's going to our national treasury. What if the tariff's too high? What are other countries going to do? They're not going to send their goods over. So now you've got less goods coming from other countries into the country. Guess what? You thought you were going to raise more money into the national treasury because you raised the tariff? No, they're not going to do it. When you raise taxes, you know what rich people do? What do they find? Well, it starts with an L. Loopholes, or they change their behavior. Oh, there's plenty of examples. One that stands out to me back in the late 80s. We're going to tax the rich. One way we're going to do is we're going to put a really high tax on yachts. You know what a yacht is, right? Like you can have a boat, you can have a boathouse, but you have a yacht, right? Guess what happened to the sale of yachts when they raised the taxes? They went way down. Of course. Because taxes are punishment, right? Really, to the business world. So amazingly, when Reagan came into office, one of the first things he did was lower taxes, and the money went up. Because now, if I'm an owner of a company and I got to pay X amount of dollars in taxes, in theory, this is the way we hope it works. The other side, the left, the liberal side, will say, "Oh no, those evil corporate people, they'll just keep all the money to themselves." But the conservative side says, the more money that you free up for that company, he's going to invest it back into his company because he wants to keep making more money. So he is going to invest that in his labor force, in his building, and in his machinery, because he wants to keep making more money. So you don't take more money from him. And you know what happens a lot of times? He hires 3 more workers. Guess what they do? Pay taxes. You follow this, Trey? They think by raising taxes, they're going to get more money. Most often they don't. So now we're just barely ahead of them. Questions, Elise? No? Taking all this in? Are you formulating your plan as a future leader of America? How are you going to handle all these problems? Are you taking all of your problem-solving strategies that you're learning in geometry and algebra, trying to think how you're going to apply to American problems?
Well, he's not really in here Friday.
I'm sorry. Did you guys have a one? Oh, yeah. Oh.